We are back with Season 8, Episode 23, Sounds of Silence. And then they're cured. So, thank you, Eclectic, very much as always. Much obliged, much appreciate. And I will jot that down for the various things. Give me a moment here. Kami. Hang on. Arcane, Streamination. And Horizon Zero Dawn 2. Done. And thank you very much as always. Right, so this episode sucks. It's the worst episode ever. First time for a repeat sending for Applejack and Fluttershy. The first thing that I find interesting about that is from an in-universe perspective, it means that it's the first time that they had an issue that requires their specific formula to fix. Their pattern, their frequency, their resonance, whatever you want to call that. The second thing I find interesting about that is, from an out-of-universe perspective, that makes perfect sense. You have an enormous quantity of variables, of potential combos of what you could send on these adventures, these D&D quests with the map, so it makes sense that you wouldn't want to do repeats. In fact, if anything, I'm a little surprised they decided to do any repeats whatsoever. Either way, the first thing they show off is the answer to the episode. This is in the intro, I want to stress. The Nirik. The Nirik, who are the opposite of the Kirin. I mean, come on. They even have a yin-yang thing going on with the frickin' shield. Anyways, they get to the literal end of the line, and I had some thoughts about whether or not the line was originally connected to something, or maybe the Kirin people originally had some kind of connections with them, or maybe this is just the arbitrary point at which they stopped building the train. All of that was thrown out the window because then we had... the ignored warning post, or whatever it's called. I forget what that's actually called. So, for those of you who don't know this, there's a horror trope. It's very common. In fact, they play with it in the Cabin on the Woods, or whatever that name of that movie is. It's the person who's like, you know, there's someone, it's sometimes dead is better, right? To use the thing from Pet Sematary. You know, there's always some person, usually some old person, who's like, you shouldn't do this. And they're always just like a little bit creepier than they should be, even though they're trying to warn the people away from the horror. Really common horror movie trope. But I love what they do with it, because, closed door. Close window. And I'll admit that got me laughing more than it probably should have. This then leads to Applejack, who's got to go all the way over this stupid thing and pause. Oh my god, Fluttershy! Go all the way back to get the freaking stupid... Okay. Fluttershy, where the hell have you been? Come on, we gotta get going. And then Fluttershy yells at her, which, first of all, that Fluttershy actually yells at her, which, of course, continues to show the development she has been through for some time. But what's interesting is that it allows her to get a word in edgewise, which is kind of the point of the episode. And also, you'll notice how Applejack and Fluttershy both end up immediately working well with each other. Applejack keeps them on task, but Fluttershy helps keep them going the right direction. And I just wanted to point that out because it is interesting how this particular duo does have good chemistry and works well with each other, so... And that's true, Raskar. I'm just saying that it's totally foreshadowing. Anyways, then we show the Kirin, who all look like Garfield. I'm going to explain that really quick. So there's a common cartoon, I guess animation, but it also works for static imagery, that became a common thing for someone who looks dull or disinterested or boring or whatever. And it's the eyes half closed look, right? You've seen it, of course. I call it the Garfield thing because Garfield popularized this particular look. If you've ever seen a picture of Garfield, and you know he's got those giant eyes, the one thing where he's got his eyes about half empty, or half closed, or however you want to think of that. And he's just got this kind of dull look. And all the Kirin have that. And I just wanted to comment on the half-lid thing, because it's a good way to convey a universal emotion, or rather, to be more accurate, a universal lack of emotion. It's just people going... It's blank face. It's how you do blank face in animated format. And that works. Yeah, it makes perfect sense since they've all ripped all their emotions out, so they literally feel nothing. So, yeah, that tracks. And yeah, it also immediately segregates Autumn from the rest of them. The first time the Kieran actually have any expression at all isn't until the second act, which we'll get to in a minute. Anyways, so then we have a quick irritation point in the episode where Applejack repeats all of the usual shenanigans. Do you... Maybe I'm just weird, but it always irritates me just a little bit when fiction, or real life, does the speak slower and louder thing. You know the one. Because everything does it. Everything does it. Games, books, movies, shows. Can you... No, they can't. You idiot. Anyway, sorry. And, of course, I should probably... That's true, she did stop doing that once she confirmed they could understand her. It's just, like I said, they have to pause for a moment to be irritating to get back to the episode. But then, as I've talked about a few bajillion times, there are many, many, many ways to communicate without using verbal language, something I myself have had to do several times in my life. I've talked about several instances of those, and I've even had a few ones since then. You know, I've talked to people who do not understand my language, or me theirs at all. We've been able to talk just fine, because there are ways to get across ideas. You can't do complex conversations. I couldn't talk to someone about, I don't know, philosophy or concepts or my favorite movie, but we could communicate and actually have functional interactions despite even if neither of us open our mouths, right? That is a thing. And I only point that out because for some reason no one seems to think in that direction for pretty much the entire episode, right up until the charades bit. Just thought I'd comment on that very briefly. So then we have another little shenanigans moment, and then we have... I love the horn glow. So obviously all the Kirans have different horns, but they also have those stripes, and only the stripes glow. But not only that, if you pay attention, the actual glow of what they're grabbing looks different than your typical pony glow. It's actually a different effect, which is really cool that they actually add that little tidbit. It's a shame that this species has only shown up here. Please don't spoil this, but I hope we see more of the Kiran in the future, because it's awesome that they did this work and effort. And obviously these are going to sell more toys, so that's irrelevant. But the point is that I do love the extra little details to help flesh them out and make them different, especially since they so quickly and effortlessly change into Nyrics. Pretty much on a whim, actually, as we see towards the later end of the episode. As an aside, I will note it that they actually reused the changeling shape-shifting animation for the Kiran. Did you catch that? It's differently colored, but it is the exact same animation. And it's like a diagonal flame that kind of goes and blows up around them. Then they switch, and then they switch back. Stuff like that. Anyways, moving on. I will admit the first time I ever heard about the Kiran was from Final Fantasy VI, but, you know, what do you want from me? Anyways, so then we have some lovely dialogue. Very, very well written and very well acted by Rachel Bloom, who I have no idea who she is. I'm guessing she's some song person because of the singing. She does a wonderful job of Zon and Blaze, though. It's harder to do the kind of things that she's doing than it sounds. So not only does she have to say run-on sentences, so it's 3 layers of difficulty for voice acting. You have to say a run-on sentence. Every single one of her lines of dialogue until, like, the last act is a run-on sentence. And I mean in the traditional sense. I don't mean a sentence that's long. A run-on sentence in the traditional editing sense of the word is multiple sentences that have been smashed together without proper punctuation or gaps or grammar. So you just kind of keep talking and shifting and rambling, and then there's another topic, and there's another topic, and you just kind of shift around. And she does this constantly. That's hard to do to begin with and make it sound natural. The second thing that's hard to do is to have the pacing of it, because she's speaking at kind of a motor mouth level when she can't hold herself topics. She's so excited, and that's harder to do than it sounds, too. Which leads us to the third thing she has to do, and if you caught it, she does it obviously a few times, but even in several of the run-through sentences, she actually mispronounces things, or pronounces things in a variant, because English is hard, and there's actually like 5 or 6 pronunciations for everything, but you get the point, right? She keeps bouncing around with regards to pronunciations. And she does this even in the middle of her sentences. Very hard to do, definite praise for the actress. This is also interesting in its own right. The lack of communication. I actually had a note here, which I was going to talk about the different types of isolation. So, lack of communication is actually another form of isolation. What I mean by that is, presume for a moment that you live in a household with 5 other people. It doesn't matter who they are, right? Roommates, family members, brothers, sisters, evil demons, I don't know, whatever. You live in this house and it's very crowded. Now, if you can, imagine for a moment that none of them ever talk to you. That is itself a form of isolation and can cause issues, and in fact is very psychologically damaging if that kind of thing happens. In fact, there are thankfully somewhat rare cases of people who actually, for lack of a better way to call this, abuse other people by refusing to talk to them, by ignoring them, and that's kind of awful. Then I find out that she was literally banished, which just kind of gets rid of all the talk and the discussion I was going to have there. So instead, she was just actually cast out of the village. Okay. But yeah, at least I was partially correct, because she did suffer from lack of communication first, to the point where it was bothering her, to the point where she wanted to go and get the cure. It's worth noting, however, that this is actually even worse than what I am positing. It is not simply a lack of communication and the forms of isolation and banishment that come with that, but it's also the lack of emotion. As they've already mentioned, this doesn't just remove their ability to talk, it kind of dulls all of their emotions. So, that sucks. And clearly she wanted to actually feel things. Cool. So then she has her song. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I did love the section with the Phantom of the Kirin, by the way. And not just because I've actually performed, as I'm sure you can guess who, within the Phantom of the Opera in real life. The Kirin Tale style of the song, I forget what this is actually called. In terms of music, this is actually very common in musicals. It's an upbeat song that is primarily musical, and every now and again effectively pauses the song to do a spoken word section, which is usually a bit or a gag for comedic effect, before going back into full tilt singing. And usually the rejoinder, as you get back into the singing portion, is much more on the higher end of the beat. You know, it's ha kind of a thing. And did you know such and such and such? Ha! That kind of pattern is the type of song that she uses here. It's very well done here, I think. It's not actually my favorite type of song, admittedly, but it is nevertheless a well-done thing. And of course, the song gets across the entire point of the episode in one neat package. You do not want to avoid the bad. You don't want to abandon the good to avoid the bad. Sometimes referred to by the popular terminology of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Now, let's rewind just a second here, because as they're talking about this, as they're singing this and doing this, there's a thing where they talk about how the Kirins would turn into Nyrics, and their anger would spread, and that's horrible. What I find most interesting about that is that's real life. So, memes are viral. Yeah, I know that sentence sounds funny in the internet age, but remember what a meme actually means. A meme is simply the concept, or a concept, idea, or otherwise thought process which actually, spreads throughout culture, throughout consciousness, throughout multiple people, right? That's what a meme... that's not even a great example or a great explanation, but that's what a meme is. Memes in real life are, by their nature, viral. That's what makes them a meme. If you think something, then, you can spread that thought, and that thought can spread, and that thought can spread, and so forth and so on. So what's interesting about this, too, is in real life, there's a lot of psychological study that goes into anger memes, specifically. If I tell you something about how horrible and disgusting, another allegation showed up about Actiblizzard just this last week. It's something I hinted at during Lore Week and didn't actually cover. But there's yet another allegation of just the kind of misuse and abuse that pregnant women specifically were having during their tenure at Actiblizzard. That's going to make you upset and angry, right? I mean, at least I hope it would. Now, let's assume that's true, of course. Well, so let's just presume that that is a true fact as opposed to an allegation. So I mentioned that, and that upsets you, and it's entirely possible that you might mention that to a friend of yours or a family member just in random conversation, which upsets them and upsets them, and so forth and so on. Now, this is the one way that anger propagates, through like-minded mentality. I am angry about this, and you are also angry about this. But there's another way that anger propagates, which is what makes anger so insidious when it comes to memes, actual, real-life concepts of memes. And that's when I am angry about something, and that makes you angry at me. Because either you disagree with me, or you're on a different side of things as me, or whatever. You may even not even be angry at anything in general. You may just be angry because you're around someone who's angry. It's one of the reasons why, in general, I try very, very hard, and have for decades, to not engage in anger when it comes to interacting with other people. If someone's yelling or shouting, I actually tend to get calmer. Nowadays, it's more of a habit, more of a reaction, because I've been practicing it for decades. But because that is the kind of thing that not only will prevent me from getting angry and not making things any better, but it tends to bring them down too. If they're yelling at me and I'm just kind of like, no, let's do that, and maintain a calm tone of voice and maintaining a reasoned thing, usually that pulls them down too, right? And this is a very common thing. This is how we as humans function. Emotions tend to spread because we are a very social species, just like ponies are. Go figure. I'll kill you for saying that, Darth Vader. Alright, there we go. I had to get that joke out, so I was just waiting for someone to say something. I can jump on him. Sorry, Darth Vader. Anyways, you get the idea. You get the idea. I find it interesting, though, because what's happening to them, literally, usually fiction has a literal explanation of a metaphoric idea, right? The paint, one side being black, one side being white, or magical beings who literally rip emotions out of other people or whatever. In this case, though, the Kirans and the Niriks, that's just humans. We don't physically turn into flame beings, but we go through exactly what they went through. One of the reasons the term riot or the term mob are so dangerous and terrifying is because of the very concept of mob mentality. Once you get a crowd riled up, that's a problem, one way or the other. Right? Like that has caused issues in many thousands, if not millions of incidents throughout human history for the last several millennia. The Great Fire at the beginning of Justinian's reign in the Byzantine Empire, to use a random historical example, which was initially started by a few politicians. Sorry, history, so who knows? What we think is what happened is it was initially started by a few politicians who were trying to usurp Justinian to get their own favorite on the throne, but it was a riot, so it got going, and that was the end of that. And they just raged and burned and pillaged and looted, and that was a mess. And we could go to examples that have happened this year. We're not going to, but you get my point, right? My overall point here is that this is an interesting episode because obviously this applies on a historical concept. This applies at a societal level. This applies at a species level. Because again, we as a people have the exact same problem the Kirans did. The Kirans decided to go ahead and remove their emotions from the equation and all the good that comes with that as their solution, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Now, the episode makes the overall point that that is incorrect. Now, I agree with that, kind of, because to me, I think that's more of a choice thing. If you want to do that, if you want to remove the good and the bad, that's a choice matter, and I'm okay with that. I don't agree with it personally, but that's fine, right? That's how that works. We're cool. I do tend to be of the mentality that, it's usually worth the bumps and scrapes on the way to have a good hike, to use a terrible analogy, right? Now, I do also, several people in chat have pointed out the obvious comparison to the Vulcans. I myself had the same thought, of course, because the Vulcans had, so for those of you not fully familiar with Vulcan history, forgive me, but the Vulcans had a incredibly near genocidal war that raged across their planet to the point of actually driving them to the point where they might have gone extinct until Surok showed up. I'm pretty sure it's Surok. And he was like, all right, everyone, no, I've got an idea. And he preached what the Kirin do. Now, it wasn't silence in his case, because what the Kirin do is even more aggressive than what the Vulcans do. But, it was the same general concept. We're going to remove, well, Vulcans can't remove their emotions. In fact, Vulcans have very intense emotions. That's the whole point. But we're going to put an iron cast on our emotions and keep very, very tightly controlled and deny our emotions the ability to interact with or affect us in any way, and just kind of move them over there and spread that throughout his people until the Vulcans, the Romulans split, and yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. Why did that war break out? So, there's actually it kind of depends on which canon you follow, because this is Trek. But the long and the short of it is, it was a naturally escalating series of wars that just kind of tumbled over each other. It wasn't one colossal war. Everybody just happened to be fighting everyone else at the same time. In fact, when Surak started preaching, that didn't stop the war. It escalated it. Because the people who, and I quote, followed the Raptor's wings, that is to say, the people who would eventually leave the planet and become the Romulans, decided to get even more hostile because, oh my god, they're trying to rip out our emotions to fix us. Right? Now, that did end up working out for them, but correct, Loner. It is the presumption that they're violent. So for those of you not aware, which maybe Loner is on this, Vulcans do not have no emotions. Vulcans have extremely intense emotions, just like the Kirans, which is why the parallel is so obvious. And their emotions are very powerful and very affecting them. And so the Vulcan way is to do everything in their power and use layers upon layers of mental discipline and programming, as well as literal chemistry and reprogramming of their minds in order to shove down the emotions and completely lock them away in this little box and just kind of never let them do anything, right? Conk. You're just going to stay here. Screw you. Well, I don't like comparing these to the Eldar because that means we have to accept that the Kirin are like the Dark Eldar, and I can't accept the concept that the Dark Eldar exist in any conjunction with My Little Pony. So I'm going to go ahead and take that idea and lock it in a little box and never think about it again. Alright, so anyways, as I was saying, this is all fascinating, obviously. And I love this topic, and I love the way they show it, and I love the way they show both sides of it, and I love how both Applejack and Fluttershy are on different sides of it for their own different reasons, because, let's be honest with ourselves, of course Applejack would be in favor of the good with the bad. She's a farmer! How much bad does a farmer have to endure every day? And of course, Fluttershy would agree with the idea of the Vulcan mentality, let's just call it what it is. Because to her, that's probably appealing, right? The idea of just kind of taking all those things that she's scared and afraid with and just kind of shoving all of that out of her life and just kind of living a nice, peaceful... Remember, Fluttershy was the one who was actually most inclined to join the cult, let's call it what it is, all the way back in Our Town, whatever the name of that episode is. What is the name of that episode? When we first got introduced to Starlight Glimmer. And yeah, I agree. Discord would be like, all right, listen. The cutie map. That's it. The cutie mark map. That's it. So it makes sense that both would take the sides. Their obvious thought and concept was put into which people would be president. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they came up with the Kirin idea and then said, okay, which ponies fit this? And then tacked Applejack and Fluttershy on because they fit the two sides of the argument so well. One thing the episode doesn't do as well as I would like is show the benefits of both sides of the point. Like I said, the episode comes very clearly down on the idea that Autumn and Applejack and good and bad is the correct choice. And that's fine, because that's probably the better message to tell kids. Because let's be honest with ourselves, ejecting everything... in my experience, when most people eject everything to avoid good and bad, they are not doing so as a well-thought-out, carefully processed thing. It's the simple solution. Nope. Instead of having putting the thought and effort work in it. You know, I'd say, well, Lord, don't you do that with no controversial topics? Well, no, actually, thank you for bringing that up, because if anybody knows anything about my no controversial topics rule, you know that it is a constantly dynamic, morphic thing that I have to put constant effort into maintaining what is what, when and how, where and why, regarding who I actually interact with. So, no, I don't throw out the baby and the bathwater. I talk about plenty of controversial things. It just depends on when and where and why, how, and why, and so forth and so on, right? You get the idea. That being said, this brings me to my biggest complaint about the episode. Then this is where the episode loses me. No, it doesn't lose me. But I want to talk about something. So at a certain point in time, I can actually jot it down here. Let's hang on. Let's catch up a little bit. Fluttershy and Applejack start arguing, so the Kirin pick them up, and by the way, they actually have a concerned expression, one of the first expressions they've actually shown, and they go to dump them in the water, which is beautifully terrifying. That is straight up a Twilight Zone moment right there. Come, we will make sure that your argument does not continue. And just kind of forcing you against your will into the pool, and that's just horrifying. I love it. Thankfully, Autumn shows up to fix them, and that's cool. And then we have Autumn showing off the point of the episode. Anger is a useful tool, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I guess we can talk about it now. And yeah, why you can't have a unicorn. Exactly, Ross. Again, they clearly thought about who they wanted here. So Autumn uses her anger as a tool. She uses it to good effect. If I might talk about Star Wars for just a second. So obviously Star Wars has had 700,000, actually closer to like 12, different interpretations of what the dark side and the light side is. Someone earlier mentioned Jedi, and I was holding off on that until right now, because the two biggest emotions that are associated with the dark side are fear and anger. I mean, you say that, Loner, but I'll get to that in a second, too. I disagree, by the way. But, moving on. Although Loner apparently wants to jump in the pool, is what I'm hearing from all your comments. And that's cool. If you want to do that, go for it. Hate doesn't really apply in MLP, which is why I was going to leave that alone. But you are, of course, correct, Darth Medoro. Anyway, so, anger and fear, right? In real life, anger and fear are very real, very powerful emotions that affect your chemistry, your brain chemistry, while you're feeling them. Because the whole point of both emotions is to try and elicit something a little bit more primal. These are survival instincts, for lack of a better way to put it, right? Now, the problem is those things can be prompted by things that have nothing to do with survival, and thus trying to deal with that is kind of the problem. But yeah, both trigger the fight or flight very, very directly, very, very conclusively. And they're also very easy to tap into. It is easy to make yourself angry or make yourself afraid if you attempt to. And just about anybody can do that. Even a child can do that. The reason I bring this up, though, is, and the reason I bring up the dark side, so obviously one of the interpretations I've always had is that the dark side is not evil. Now, to be clear, this is not true in the AU. The AU has made it very clear that the dark side is evil. Whatever. The point being, back in the EU, I always held the interpretation, and several works agreed, that the dark side was not evil, it was difficult, quicker, more dangerous, more seductive, to more or less directly quote Mr. Yoda there on that one. The idea that the dark side is a useful tool, as Mace Windu can as Mace Windu can talk about, but it is a very dangerous tool, because it's so easy to slip into it. It's so easy to let it define you, so easy to let it control you. Like what happened to the Vulcans back in the day, like what happens when someone is doing their own thing. Yeah, it's very similar to Fel in Warcraft. Fel is a very useful tool and can be used to great effect. It can even be used to heal, as we've actually seen a few times. But Fel is incredibly dangerous. Now, the reason I'm kind of bringing all of this up is just because it's dangerous doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. But you should be very careful about using it. Just like in real life. We have tools in real life that are incredibly dangerous to use. That doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. You shouldn't stop driving. But driving is very dangerous. Do yourself a favor. Never look up how many deadly driving accidents happen in the United States every day. Don't do that. Really. Driving is incredibly dangerous, and it is a near-lethal thing that most people do on a daily basis. And if I'm being honest, I do think that people should be more careful about that. But that's my point, really. It is something that's dangerous that we should treat accordingly. I don't think we should stop doing it. I think we should be cautious with its usage. One of the reasons why airplanes, at least here in the States, tend to have so fewer accidents is because they are very, very careful about flight. There are many, many layers. Hey, I don't know about the rest of the world. I just know about here, Act. There are many layers of safety and proper execution of airline safety. I mean, if you've seen some of the stuff they go through to make sure that airplanes run smoothly and have no issues, it's insane, except it totally isn't. And you're exactly right, Raskor. It's managed properly, And so even though flying, which is incredibly more dangerous, magnitudes more dangerous than driving, it is still something we use on a daily basis. Nuclear power is an excellent example of this kind of concept. My overall point here, and I've talked about this before, because the MLP has actually touched on this topic before, usually with fear specifically. Fear is a useful tool. It is. Fear can be very powerful, very useful. It can even be a positive force. After all, who doesn't like riding? Well, I'm sure at least some of you, I shouldn't say it like that way. I'm sure at least some of you like riding on a roller coaster, right? That is a positive use of fear, believe it or not. And of course, it can be done something that can be done to help you get out of a dangerous situation if you are actually in one. Just like pain. But you get my point. The overall point I'm trying to make is that and why I am kind of in favor of the episode's point is that the episode shows how anger is a tool which Autumn uses to try and fix this, right? To try and make this happen, to try and ensure this situation works properly. This is when I catch back up to Loner. Right after I throw Loner in the water. Sploosh. There we go. Okay. Wait, that was the pond of duplication. Sorry, Loner, there's two of you now. Anyways, she goes off to vent. This is something this show has covered a lot as well. Healthy venting. We've had like 3 entire episodes around the concept of healthy venting. And I do like how they just have this little moment of her getting upset. Like, hang on. Ugh. I feel better. What's up? It's a really minor moment, but it is an important one. Because the whole point of that moment is to show that every now and again you do need to, vent. That we do need to be able to have those kind of healthy outlets for our emotions to be able to go, ugh. Okay. Mental reset. Try again. And obviously adults could use that lesson too, but that's the kid moment right there. I've been pointing this out as we go. Most of the season 8 has been far more clearly designed for adults. But that scene is there so that the kids can see in action something they can do if they're getting upset at, for example, their friend. If you're having an argument over your friend about Pokemon cards, which I saw happen last Monday, it's not exactly an invalid thing to just have a pause moment. Be like, okay, hang on. Because that's the biggest thing I learned. This is years and years ago now for me, but the pause is the biggest tool I've ever developed for fighting my own anger. Because if you just let the anger get going, then it snowballs, right? If you pause, it's gone. The source of your anger is still there, but the snowball ceases. All momentum ceases in the anger. And it's just like, okay. You just take a moment, reset. Some of you have probably seen me get frustrated at games while I'm streaming it. You may see me go off on a rant. That is actually my pause moment, believe it or not, because what I'm doing is I'm making fun of it. I'm turning it into a joke. I'm turning it into something that the viewers can laugh at and that I can internally mock. It's like, oh my god. And that's my own little pause moment. And now I can reset and get back. And usually I get right back into it and succeed, within the few attempts after that, because I've reset myself, right? So again, very good thing to show off, especially for kids. In the aforementioned Pokemon argument, what actually happened was I jumped in and enforced a pause by saying, well, hang on, how does this work? And I had just a completely normal tone of voice when I say it. It was about Charizard. I'm not going to give you the details. I was like, well, hang on, wouldn't Charizard work this way? And both kids paused and looked at me like, well, yeah, that one. And by basically enforcing that pause, all momentum was gone and the argument was over. Didn't escalate. I actually talked to my niece about it afterwards. I explained to her what I did. She was like, oh, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it took me until my 20s to learn that lesson, so, I'm trying to get that in a little earlier for her. Why 10-2? Unless you were going through the, what's it called? The Via Infinito, which is one of the worst dungeons It's not as bad as the frickin' Infinity Dungeon, but god dang. Or the Ancient Cave. That's the worst dungeon in gaming. Anyways, the point being, then they do charades. And she goes off, vents her anger. Everything's cool. And this is when I'm going to share my big thought about the episode. At about this moment, I was like, I had the realization the episode was wrapping up. And it felt weird. And I realized that in terms of narrative structure and in terms of pacing, it felt like we were still in Act 1 at that moment. And I checked. We had 2 minutes and 15 seconds left in the episode when I checked that. You know, it was doing the final wrap-up, and I'm just like... Now, on the one hand, that's a good thing. It means the episode was very well paced and very well constructed up to that point. Very dense, if you will. You know, bam! And then that's kind of it, right? The downside of that is that it means it wraps up very hastily and improperly. Act 2 and Act 3 are slammed into what would effectively be about a minute each. And it's strange. But yeah, it's the ending was very rushed, but the episode proper was very dense. A lot going on, a lot of good stuff, too. Obviously, we've had a lot to discuss as well. And so I'm just like, and this brings up my final thought. And this is when the episode loses me. No, I'm joking. But in all honesty, this is when I bring up my final thought. One thing I discovered when I was going through Enterprise Season 4 is how much I like seasonal, mid-season arcs. So let me explain this a little bit. For the longest time, when I was younger, I'll talk about this in the Enterprise Ruminations as well, so forgive me for the repeat, but that was over a year ago at this point, so from my perspective, and you won't be seeing that until like a year from now, so. For the longest time, I held to the idea of string continuity. In other words, 5 episodes telling one story, or 20 episodes telling one story, right? Of season-long arcs. And the biggest reason I held to that idea was because A, I'm a huge continuity hound, and B, Babylon 5. Yeah, like Season 3 of Enterprise, exactly. Then I actually went through Enterprise Season 3 and it sucked, but let's not get into that. The relevant point is then I hit Enterprise Season 4. Now, Enterprise Season 4 didn't do that. What Enterprise Season 4 did was 2, 3, or 4 episode arcs like this. There were background plot elements throughout the whole season, like the foundation of the Federation and the connection of Tucker and T'Pol and all sorts of other stuff like that. But for the most part, it was multi-episode mini arcs, right? And I realized just how much better that works. Not just for the narrative purpose, not just for telling the story, because, you know, there's just so much more room to breathe and work and develop, but also from a production standpoint. As I've talked about many, many times, when you do a 2-parter in television, what you're doing is you're getting 2 episodes cheaper than you would if you did 2 separate episodes, because you don't have to do completely separate set designs, you don't have to rehire cast people, it's cheaper to bring people in, you know, guest stars. You hire a guest star for a 2-parter, it's cheaper than hiring 2 guest stars for 2 episodes, and so forth and so on, right? For pretty much everything from the production line is so much cheaper, easier, and smoother to do arcs, or 2-parters, than it is to do 3 individual episodes, or 4 individual episodes, right? And you get the point. And yeah, Justice League Not Unlimited, excuse me, confused me. I was going to say, wait, what? But yeah, Justice League kind of did this too, and several of the DCAU shows did this exact concept through 2, 3, 4 episode arcs. Yeah, Clone Wars almost universally had arcs in terms of its design. Very, very few standalones in that one. But they also didn't do the season-long thing. The reason I'm bringing all this up is the more I've studied television, I've studied television a lot in the last 2 years, the more I've come to believe in that concept as, let's call it a standard, right? You know, you do the arc, maybe have a standalone breather episode, do another arc, standalone breather, right? And it's weird to me how little of television does this. I mean, there have been examples, of course, we've just listed several episodes, but very, very few television shows ever embrace this. And I find myself, as we're looking at this, as we're going through this, wondering why they didn't do this here, or indeed in general with season 8 and 9. I mean, they had the establishment. They had, you know, the biggest worry most people have is exactly what Weouds is pointing out, that these episodes can't stand on their own. But that's more of a worry from a production standpoint or a marketing standpoint early on in a show, not late in a show. If you're early on in a show, you want to catch people. And that means you want people to be able to hop in and see this one episode and enjoy that one episode. So an arc doesn't work in that favor, right? So you don't really want to lean into that early on. But when a show is well established and you're over here at season 4 or 8 or 12 or 13 or 75, it's a little bit more feasible to say, okay, we're going to do this 3-episode arc, because you already have the marketing snowball, you already have the marketing weight going behind it, so that people are more likely to stick around for the arc than just poke in for one episode, get lost, and walk away. Also, I should probably mention that nowadays arcs are a little bit more feasible thanks to digital production and the fact that traditional television doesn't even exist anymore in the sense of the word, but that's neither here nor there. You get my point, though, right? I'm weirded out that they didn't do this more in Season 8 and 9, because this is pretty much the perfect time to do that kind of a thing. We do seem to be having more two-parters from what I'm looking at, but that's presumption since I don't actually know what's going on here. And that's true, Loner. You can do a brief wrap-up, which, honestly, Enterprise Season 4 did do, for the reasons previously listed, for the concern that people would pop in and not know what's going on. Valid approach, right? Either way, just food for thought, because, obviously, the reason I'm bringing this up now is the Kirans felt like this should be an arc. This didn't feel like an episode. This felt like Part 1. But to my knowledge, there is no Part 2. And that's the only thing that really pulls me out of the episode overall. I mean, there's little nitpicks I could bring up. But that's the big thing that makes me go, oh. Okay. And yeah, you always gotta... Last time on My Little Pony. Gotta really get into there, you know, get the barrel chest going on. I could go deeper than that, but I need to have more water. You should hear my voice in the middle of the night. My voice is super deep and super bassy at the middle of the night. Like, I've heard it before. Like, I've been woken up in the middle of the night, and my voice is just down, like a full octave below where I am right now. But anyways, let's go ahead and review this sucker. So I'm thinking... So this is by Gregory Bonsignore, which I am almost assuredly pronouncing wrong. I have no idea who this person is. This is their first episode. There's a lot of good here. I think I've already given that away by virtue of the fact that we've been talking about it for, let's see here, 40 minutes. But also there's the fact that the only complaint I had is effectively there's not more of it, which is a pretty good complaint to have overall. I would say orange is the floor for me. I could very easily be talked up to red, because there's a lot of good stuff here. There's a lot of good discussion. There's a lot of good everything. Like I said, it's an extremely dense episode. One of the things I talk about a lot when going through the Enterprise and the TOS episodes is there's a huge difference between an episode where I'm 5 minutes into it, I'm like, I'm only 5 minutes into the episode. Or an episode where I'm 40 minutes into it, I'm like, oh my god, I'm 40 minutes into the episode. And this is one of the latter. Anytime the episode catches me enough that I don't notice the passage of time is a good thing, in my opinion. Yeah, it does have good world building. It does have good character moments. It has a nice song, I guess. The Kirin are fascinating as a species. It touches on some wonderful topics. And again, has moments that would be valuable for both kids and adults to learn, and yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, no, it really does feel like this was written to be a two-parter. Again, which is why it weirded me out so much when it just kind of stopped. I mean, the issue was resolved? Kind of? Actually, the issue wasn't resolved at all. That's sort of the point, isn't it? But anyways, and then it just stops. We're done. It even ends on a boop. Although there was no wah-wah, so that is nice. Take it away, boys. And yeah, as pointed out, Applejack and Fluttershy were... The catalyst is a good word for that. They were here to get the ball rolling. They were here to be like, poke, and then just disrupt the system enough for everything to be like, oh, right, yeah, okay. I'm going to go with red, I think. I think this is a good episode. This is a very good episode, excuse me. This is definitely worth looking at. Next episode, which I know nothing about other than it's supposed to suck, I think. Actually, this might not be that one. It's by Josh Haber. Oh, that's interesting. He says Haber is the rainbow, one of our rainbow writers, right up there with Polsky. And he's had a lot of reds. 8, episode 24. Come on, Father Knows Beast. Actually, no, Haber, I think I'm thinking of the wrong person. Haber isn't our rainbow. Who is our rainbow person? Oh, no, Michael Vogel. That was our rainbow writer. Because Michael Vogel has hit everything. Blue, green, yellow, orange, red, purple. Yeah, Vogel is the Rainbow Rider. Sorry, my bad. Haber is the red. And of course, Larson is the purple. The Purple King. Larson has not gone below green. He has no yellows, which is interesting. But anyways, no. So Haber, we'll see. In about 25 minutes. If I can find the cutoff button. Where's the stop recording?